Now then, everyone, welcome to the 5th episode of Highlander, the show where we talk about every single legendary card in Hearthstone. I'm here with my co-host and good friend Jamie. How are you doing, Jamie?
Good, thanks. Hello, everybody.
And I'm James, telling you to sit back and relax as we talk about the final few classic set cards. I should probably say ahead of time that we're talking about the Hall of Fame cards that aren't Prophet Velen, because we talked about that one in episode 3.
Yeah.
And their replacements. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the Hall of Fame as a concept as well. So yeah, let's crack on. Ragnaros the Firelord. 8 mana, 8/8 neutral legendary. At the end of your turn, deal 8 damage to a random enemy character.
Can't attack.
Oh, and can't attack, yeah.
Yeah, and it's an elemental for what it's worth.
Where do you even start with Ragnaros? Probably one of the most powerful cards ever made, right?
I'd back that, yeah. I mean, I remember when I started playing, it was kind of the first card everybody said craft. That was Sylvanas, actually. It was one of those two. I crafted Sylvanas first and then Ragnaros, funnily enough, so...
Yeah, I think I was the other way around, actually.
Yeah, I wish I probably should have done it the other way around, to be honest.
I would argue that Ragnaros is a more powerful 8-drop than Tyrion. And it's obviously situational, but I think generally you've got to give it to Rag, in my opinion.
Tyrion's a better defensive card, whilst also being proactive, but Ragnaros, in terms of proactive cards that do something when you play them, it's kind of the go-to, right? So what makes Ragnaros so powerful is the fact that it's can't attack plus deal random damage, acts as like a pseudo charge whilst not taking any health away from it. So it stays as an 8/8.
Well, that's just it. You can't take Tyrion's efficiency away from him, but Rag does something that Tyrion doesn't, and that does 8 damage to something now. It's interesting because it's up to the opposing player to deal with Ragnaros, because the person who plays Rag is never obviously going to trade with him. It's just a cannon that fires constantly, and it's horrific.
Yeah, because it's like snowballs the game if you can't kill it for a few turns. Just by definition, the 8 is our big number in a game with 30 health.
Blizzard is obviously Hall of Fame Rag. It was in the first Hall of Fame rotation, wasn't it?
So, it was.
Just before Ungoro. One of the reasons Ragnaros was rotated was because of the fact that nearly every deck ran him, or if it didn't, it could find a pretty good reason for doing so. Rag is like a nexus between what top-end aggro decks want and what finisher or value bomb a control deck wants, especially at the time that it was Hall of Famed. So if you're a control deck and you just drop Ragnaros, if it kills your opponent's big statted minion, it's just an unbelievable exchange of value. Even if Rag misses and hits their face or hits like a small minion and they still trade into Rag, it's still going 1-for-1.
Yeah.
And as Jamie has already said, it's like having just charge on a body for an aggro deck. So a lot of aggro decks ran him as the top end.
Something you can't say about many cards is that they were both aggro, top end, finisher, and a control value card. And the other thing is, especially near at the start of the game, there wasn't much removal that lined up well against Rag.
Yep.
I targeted things like Fireball, Swipe, Lava Burst, if you want to count that. Nothing lines up well against it because 8 health's too much.
Yeah.
You can't even go Fireball Ping, so that leaves it at 1, and then it still does the 8 damage. So it's kind of, you have to like hex it and polymorph it to kind of get rid of it. People often had to include specific answers for Ragnaros because of how prevalent it was, or like save things back if they were expecting it to come down. One
time that I can think of that Rag saw less play in Standard was because even more powerful legendary that we will love talking about was printed, and that's Dr. Boom. We've mentioned Boom already, and we will mention him a lot more as time goes on, but this is 7 mana 7/7, Battle Cry Summon 2 1/1 Boom bots. The meta basically shaped around him in that every deck ran Dr. Boom. A lot of people ran Big Game Hunter. Was it 3 mana at this point for Big Game Hunter?
Yeah, it was. Which was the best answer to Ragnaros as well at this point.
You see a lot of decks cut Rag at this point, just because of the fact that if Rag gets hit by Big Game Hunter, that's really bad for you. And people didn't really run it before because it's not really hitting that many things. But because you can be you can rest assured knowing that your opponent is going to run Dr. 7, then running Ragnaros as well is quite dangerous. So actually, if you look at a lot of lists at this time period, a lot of the Control Warrior lists and Handlock lists use Sneed's Old Shredder and Kel'Thuzad as well. And I just find that incredible, like looking back and seeing all these like strange, slow legendaries being used exclusively because they can't be hit by Big Game Hunter. It's just crazy, really.
Just speaks volumes about how overpowered Big Game Hunter was, to be honest, at 3 mana.
Yeah, it was a bit dangerous. After Dr. Boom rotated out, Ragnaros very quickly rose back to his former glory and saw playing nearly every deck. I was telling Jamie before we recorded, but if you go on Hearthstone, there are over 1,300 pages of decks that have Rag in them. And I think every page has about 20 decks on it. So someone else can do the math and figure out that it's about, 2,600 decks? Like,
it's a lot.
Obviously, Blizzard has recognised that is something problematic. You can't just have a neutral legendary that is that easy to put into a deck. Ziliax somehow escaped. Rag did not.
There's just no downside to putting Rag in a deck at that point when the game's a bit more tempo based and a bit more mid rangey. Ragnaros is like the ultimate mid range card. It's like a top end closer. It's one of the absolute like cornerstones of that style of deck. When the game was a bit less powerful, a lot of decks were mid range sort of tight play styles. A lot of running things like Azure Drake, stuff like that. Sylvanas, in fact, like Belcher, things like that.
Definitely, absolutely. One thing that really shows how powerful and dangerous Ragnaros is to the game design is when, what's the name of the event called?
It's Doom in the Tomb.
It's such a cheesy name. When Doom in the Tomb came around, there's a lot of decks that ran Ragnaros as like a finisher, or especially in Highlander decks, just ran him because, again, he's just great in a control deck, great value, especially if it trades with, an enemy, big guy, or better yet, fires 8 damage into it.
I didn't play much of Doom in the Tomb, but the bit that I didn't see Rag as often as I was expecting to. But I think you're right about seeing playing Highlander decks. I think that was kind of the main way it was used.
I wasn't really playing Hearthstone at this point, but looking back through a lot of the lists and every meta report I could get my hands on, the best deck at this point was Highlander Secret Hunter in Standard. And that ran Rag almost immediately as soon as the event started and never really dropped him because he was just that good of an 8-drop. There were a few lists going around that weren't Highlander, but still ran Rag because he's an amazing 8-drop, it turns out. I'm trying to think of what else we could talk about with Rag in Standard, but I think we've covered it, really. I mean, it's just a really powerful card. He may be the reason that Blizzard don't print many 8-drops anymore. Should we talk about Wild?
So yeah, on to Wild. So
yes.
Ragnaros in Wild he's had far less success, especially now he doesn't see much play at all. And even historically, he's not seen much play.
I think there is a big difference in the way people have to build decks in Standard to how they do it in Wild. And this is me talking as a Wild player, so just tell me if I'm being a dick. When I'm building a deck in Wild, I feel like I have about 40 or 45 cards that I want to put in a deck. And I have to somehow cut everything down to about 30, right? But I feel like if I look at Standard lists, I always feel like I'm seeing, right, here's 20 really, really good cards. Here's about 5 that are pretty good. And here's about 5 that are just sort of like in most decks, right? Or just like auto-includes.
But yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. In Wild, because the synergies are so much more important, you have to really build a deck much more around Ragnaros as a key component to actually make it worth including. The one exception to this that I've seen somewhat recently is when Saviors of Uldum was released, one deck that got a lot of attention was Reno Even Shaman. And I think you've played some of this, haven't you?
Yeah, I ran Rag in it. But Even Shaman is one of the decks I was going to talk about that's actually ran Rag at various points. Like, it wasn't the core card by any means, but you usually had one 8-drop slot. And it was usually Rag or the Lich King, depending on personal preference.
Because this is like a more mid-rangey build of Even Shaman, right? This is like using...
Yeah, this is way different to current Even Shaman. You still see the odd, like, mid-rangey overload decks pop up from time to time. But now it's a Sworn token deck. Totemic Surge and Splitting Axe are powerful. Like I said, the mid-rangey builds do still exist and people do still play them from time to time, but Rag and Lich have still been phased out of those as well. Like, Squall Hunter takes up 2 card slots, for example. And
and the minion that summons tokens when you overload, right?
Thunderhead, yeah. Talk about unnecessary buffs as well. I have another deck to talk about. So, about, I guess, a year and a half ago or something, I hit Wild Legend with even more, like a few months in a row. And there was one tech slot for an 8-drop, and I ran Ragnaros as my 8-drop for the whole time. And it was a good pressure tool, especially against like big priests or slower decks. I wouldn't say it was sort of excelled, but it was a good like extender, right? I mean, even Warlock again, that deck's got about 60 cards you can play in it. It's not exactly a deck that lends itself to wasting card spaces on like tech cards, at least not now it isn't. There's so many good cards that you can play in it. I think Ragnaros' time in that deck's gone, unless you're really, if it becomes a way of mana cheating, it may be, but...
Speaking of mana cheat, we should probably talk about why Rag sees play now.
As your segue.
But as I said earlier, synergies are everything. You know, much more than raw power level on the card. And Rag does see playing decks, but they have to either cheat him out or find a way of resurrecting him over and over again. So Rag actually does see quite a bit of play, but the thing is, it's not in the traditional way that you would see playing standard. What's the best word here? Should we say infamous? Yeah, let's go with infamous.
Yeah, that's a good word.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. The
most infamous use of Rag in Wild is, without a shadow of a doubt, Big Priest. Wild players shudder everywhere. Big Priest is a deck, in case you didn't already know, that resurrects minions over and over again. Ragnaros was a pivotal card in that deck, because if you just keep resurrecting Ragnaros over and over again, and you're playing a slow control deck, and you have nothing for Rag to hit but your face, that's a lot of damage.
Cheers, Phil. It's not like once they resurrect it once, they can not resurrect it again, right? That's the problem with the deck. You can Eternal Servitude it once, and then you can Eternal Servitude it again, and so on, and like the next turn.
Yep.
The nerf to Barnes kind of essentially killed the deck. Only sees play by people who don't realise it's bad. Speaking of mana cheating decks, what is interesting is that the best quote-unquote big deck in the Wild meta at the moment is comfortably Big Shaman. That doesn't run Ragnaros, even though it has all the hallmarks of a deck that would.
So you've played a lot of Big Shaman, so why do you think it doesn't?
Big Shaman is all about creating the stickiest and most annoying board possible. So it's like you play Scrapyard Colossus, taunt that comes back as a 7/7, and then you play your defensive tool, so you play your Walking Fountain, and then your Yasharaj to pull something out of the deck. And then you kind of have one card slot as your anti-control luxury card. Colossus is so unpleasant to remove, especially if you can get like an Ancestral Spirit on it or a Vivid Spores. It's like once...
Oh no, don't.
Yeah. As a warrior player, I imagine you like the sound of that.
Yeah, Colossus of the Moon is just horrendous to play against. I really, really hate it. I mean, obviously, I don't care about the design. Like, the design's fine. It's just the fact that, oh my goodness, I didn't expect Big Shaman to be so frustrating, shall we say.
Speaking of Big Shaman, I played a funny game the other day. I went off with Scrapyard Colossus and Yasharaj and like Vivid Spores everything. He devolved, but he devolved one of them into Bulldozer. And I tell you what, Bulldozer is really good. So I've got a screenshot of like 3 Bulldozers ready to just kill it.
Fantastic. Does that make it into bad Big Shaman?
No, Bulldozer's too good though. It's just Colossus, but not quite as good.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I thought this card seems like a bit too good.
But turns out not quite as good Colossus is still really good.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Should we talk about Rag? Yeah, let's talk about Rag.
That's professionalism, this is. One more thing is that when Reno Mage was more control-oriented, Ragnaros was played because of it being an elemental. It would lifesteal for 8 when you played it after playing the Death Knight. That at the time was powerful and was, necessary. It was one of the better sort of endgame cards in the deck, and it was often something you wanted to try and clone with Zola or something like that. But Reno Mage has completely changed since then, and it's now Pocket Galaxy Simulator. Which is another thing standard players will be very familiar with.
Sounds like broken cards are broken cards, sometimes in both formats.
Oh, yes. Well.
What do you think of Rag's design?
I mean, it's weird, if you ask me. After having extensively discussed the classic set cards, Rag is such an anomaly. I don't quite know how they balanced him compared to everything else in the set, really.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Like we've been saying all along, oh, it's just a big chunk of stats, it doesn't do anything on the board, oh, it's too slow, oh, it's not proactive enough, it's not reactive enough. Well, Rag's everything, it's all of those things, or at least it certainly was at the start of the game. I still think it would have seemed playing standard, and like you said, it's sort of playing the Doom of the Tomb event. So, like, it's still relevant, and just seems at odds with everything else, except for the other cards that we're going to discuss.
It's so strange how you could have this and Gruul in the same set. You know, as two cards that cost 8. I'll tell you the one thing that I think enabled Rag to get away with things for so long in Standard is the fact that in Standard at this point, Rag was only ever coming out on 8 or 7 if you discounted him with Forresten or got a coin or something like that. So unlike something like Tink or Nat Pagel, where it's consistently on early turns and changes the fate of the game like immediately, Rag has to wait quite a while. You have to draw him and you have to play him, and it has to impact the board in some game-changing way. And those instances do happen. Like, every Wild player has probably had an instance where they've either won the game or lost the game due to amazing or terrible RNG for Ragnaros. But those instances are still rare. That's why we remember them, compared to something like Nat Pagel and Tink. And I think that's why those cards got nerfed, whereas Rag remained as he did, even though he was an incredibly powerful card.
I agree completely. It's very rare that they nerf cards that are like past about 7 mana, purely because at that point, like, you can deal with a powerful card.
Yeah, that's true. Closing thoughts on Rag, incredibly powerful card. May see more play in Wild in the future. May not. It's really hard to say. I mean, you can never say for certain, can you? They could invent some new elemental discounting synergies. The potential is always there.
Well, that's just it. I think we've covered it in enough detail. Like, cards uncharacteristically powerful for a classic set of card. A fair inclusion in the Hall of Fame, because it's too good without any real downside to playing it.
Absolutely. Completely fair inclusion, in my opinion. High Inquisitor Whitemane. 7 mana 6/8 Battlecry. Summon all friendly minions that died this turn. Legendary neutral minion as well. Whitemane and Brightwing were added, was it in the middle of 2019 or?
It was, yeah.
Oh, okay, right. That's fair. It's a really odd decision to print this card, I think.
Honestly, mate, I think it's one of the worst legendaries in the game in terms of its effect. I was thinking about it. Okay, so the problem with this card is that it's a 7 mana card that requires you to trade in a bunch of minions and have them all die to get a good value out of it. So it's only very good specifically if your opponent has a lot of taunts up, preferably trading your big minions with low health. And there is never a circumstance where this happens, essentially.
It's like a trap card, right? It's just a trap.
And then if you've got a big board and your opponent has like one big minion, and you can trade some stuff in to get a good value out of Whitemane's Battlecry, you may as well just hit face, because you should just hit face. So it rewards trading. So it's not good for aggro, it's not good for mid-range. And then you don't want just stats in control. And then you're not going to have a big wide board to get use effect out of it. So it's like realistic that you're only going to get a couple of maybe medium-sized minions off of it. Realistic value. And that's not good enough.
Is there a more fitting example of a win more card in Hearthstone? I don't know if there is.
But if you're winning that much, you may as well just hit face.
Like Jamie said, if you're at aggro, your opponent's got a big thing up, and you're thinking, I should trade into that. Always ask yourself, what is trading going to do for me, right? It doesn't get you anywhere as an aggro deck. Don't let me see you run Inquisitor for that one time where you actually want to trade, because it's just a bad idea. Do you know what's a good comparison? That spell that was released in Rastakhan's Rumble, Revenge of the Wild for Hunter. That's a 2 mana spell. Summon all friendly beasts that died this turn, right? That's the same thing, but much more flexible. I know there's a restriction with beasts, but most Hunter aggro decks run beasts anyway, right? So,
and it has like good synergy with charge cards like Unleash the Hounds as well.
Exactly.
I think Revenge of the Wild is a much, much stronger card than Whitemane, and Revenge of the Wild sees no play at all.
Yeah.
I've never really put in the effort to think about how bad this card is, but what it is it's good for you when you started playing the game again, if you know what I mean. I remember when you started playing again and you played Arena and stuff, you were pretty bad for overtrading and playing for value too much. You've massively improved your play by learning when to hit face.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's just you can't respect your opponent all the time.
Yeah, what lets the card down is that Hearthstone fundamentally is a game about hitting face.
Do you know what? It's funny you say that because Hearthstone is obviously attacker's initiative, right? So on your turn, the opponent cannot do anything. The only way the opponent can really interact when it's your turn is through death rattles or secrets and stuff like that, and that doesn't really count. Whitemane would actually be quite an interesting card in a game where the opponents can choose when to defend or use their taunts and stuff like that. So like in something like, I think Magic does this, and
Rune Terror.
Rune Terror, right?
Yeah.
If your opponent is holding a card their whole game and you think that could be Whitemane, it might be quite popular in this format, and you've got to sort of play around it. That would be quite interesting, but in Hearthstone, it just doesn't work. It's like James said, there's just no reason to run the card. It just encourages like bad habits in aggro players because you don't want the value. You want tempo. You want to hit them in the face. You know, Whitemane just accomplishes nothing for you. So
if you're trading a control deck, you're going to try and take value trades and have your minions live.
Yeah.
So that's the thing with it, is it requires all your minions to die as well. It's a complete car crash of a card, really. It
really is. And I can understand why they've printed this, you know, to not have the problem that they had with Rag and Sylvanas and that they're just auto-includes and everything, but they've gone like way overboard with the design. It needs to be completely scrapped and started again. Like, you can't fix this.
Yeah, it's way off the other end of the scale.
Yeah. I think that's worse, honestly, especially in the classic set when someone might unpack this.
Imagine this is your first classic legendary. You start a new account.
When they designed new classic cards, Blizzard made it very clear to everyone that the new cards were there for the new player experience, and they weren't designed to be, you know, fundamental building blocks of each class. Brightwing, at least I can understand why they've done it, because it adds a random legendary minion. Random legendary minions are fun. It's one of the really fun things you can do in Hearthstone. I think of like Golden Monkey Warrior, right? That's a really fun deck. Just random legendaries are great fun, and they're not necessarily competitive, at least not anymore, but it's just good, and it gives you insight into how different classes play with Brightwing and stuff like that. But Whitemane is like, it's there to teach you not to use the card in the optimal way because it's bad. It's just, I just don't get it. I just don't understand. Like, what lesson does this teach people? Oh my god, this card makes me furious, and I know it makes you angry as well. But I just don't get it. I really don't get it.
Yeah,
it's like if they printed the Beast again. It's honestly like that.
It's the Beast levels of bad, I would say. I've played the card once in a tavern brawl. Once. What does that say about it?
There's not many cards in this game that I've never seen played, and this is certainly one of them. I have no idea what this card's voice line is.
I don't know either.
Yeah. I was hoping you would know, but...
No chance.
Oh dear. We keep referring to cards as like, you know, the Deathwing effect, where cards that are really good off of RNG, but you don't even want to see this off of RNG. It's just that bad. It's like there is no situation where you want this.
It's also extremely difficult to get this off of RNG.
Oh, that's true, actually, yeah. That's true.
Like I said, I played it once, so...
You see it off of Mulch quite a lot.
I've not seen Mulch for a good year.
Let's move on from this, because it's just making me angry.
Yeah, let's move on.
Brightwing, 3 mana, 3/2, battle cry. Add a random legendary minion to your hand. And this is a dragon, neutral minion. Unlike Whitemane, I actually really like this card. And I know it's RNG, and I always don't like much variance and swing in the RNG in Hearthstone, but I actually really do like Brightwing, and I think it's great. As a card to introduce new people to the game and show people like a variety of different legendary minions, I think it's really cool. And it actually has some competitive viability because it's a dragon and it serves as a half-decent activator in Standard. I really like Brightwing. What do you think?
I think it's a solid card that's slightly below the power curve as a general rule, but it sees play in the odd deck.
Yeah.
Because it's a good dragon.
Yeah.
With a decent effect. Right? Highlander Road plays it.
Okay.
like relatively often, because it can give you an activate for your burgle stuff. It's a good minion on curve and it's decent value. It's decent stats. It's not good, but it's not way off to the point that it's not like a 1-1 or something. Like a 3-2 can still contest. And it'll draw usually a decently powerful card.
Oh, yeah. Especially in Standard, I would say that the average legendary is more powerful in the majority of situations.
Yeah. Well, there's less things that require synergy.
Yeah, unlike in Wild where you could get a Cthulhu, right?
Yeah.
Although, I suppose in Standard, your chances of getting High Inquisitor Whitemane are actually slightly higher, so...
Do you know what? I'm gonna have something in here. So...
Go on.
I've got the Hearthstone Gamepedia page up on Brightwing. Random legendaries tend to be weak, but can still provide an extra minion late in the game.
Oh, yeah.
Minions like Gruul, Deathwing, and High Inquisitor Whitemane can take opponents off guard if they've already spent removal on your other threats. Now, this is the best. Even weaker legendaries like Savius or the Beast can be played when you have spare mana. Alternatively, they can be used to bait answers to make room for the minions you actually included in your deck. Now that is gold, that is.
Oh my goodness. God bless him. God bless him. That's great.
That's quality stuff, that is.
Thank you for reading that. That's fantastic. The most common times I see Brightwing, and I know that I'm going to be in for a good time, is if I play against a Reno Priest and they play Zeph on 2 and they play a Brightwing on 3. And I think, I like this guy. We're going to have some fun.
I'll tell you something about Brightwing is that I actually see it and play it quite a lot because of Dragonic Lackey, especially in Standard. Brightwing is pretty common, and with Dragonic Lackey, you very often want to take the cheapest thing just for mana efficiency, because otherwise your hand can get clogged. Brightwing's very often the cheapest thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
3 mana 3/2 draw a card's quite decent.
It's a decent card. I think it's quite well designed. I really, really enjoy it. And it's not overly powerful. Obviously, no deck in Wild runs it, but I really enjoy it. I think if I was a new player coming into the game and Brightwing was one of the first things I opened, I think I would really, really enjoy it. Sylvanas Windrunner. 6 mana, 5/5, Death Rattle. Take control of a random enemy minion. One of the most powerful Death Rattles ever printed. Let's just get that out of the way. I think when Sylvanas was rotated to the Hall of Fame, the primary reason for doing so, because the card wasn't seeing as much play at that point, was because they were planning to introduce a lot of Death Rattle synergies in the year of the Mammoth.
Yeah.
So, for example, Hunter got Play Dead, and it got the 3 mana 3/3 trigger a friendly minions Death Rattle in Ungoro and stuff like that. So obviously in Standard, Sylvanas would have been absolutely busted. And they've obviously printed further Death Rattle synergy cards, as time's gone on. And again, they're really powerful in Wild with Sylvanas, and they would be even more so in Standard.
It's a real contender for the best Death Rattle in the game. There's very little.
Oh yeah.
There's very few other Death Rattles, especially for its cost. I think in terms of Death Rattle to cost by efficiency, it's probably number 1, right?
Well, let's think about something like Scrapyard Colossus, right?
Yeah.
That's a 10 mana effect, and that's a 7/7. And Sylvanas, while it does have the potential to go lower than that, because you're the one playing it, it also has the potential to go much higher in that, you could just steal the original Scrapyard Colossus. Something like that. Sneed's Shredder, that has the potential to higher roll as well, but more often than not, like Sylvanas is just a much more powerful effect.
You look at card mana costs. I remember at the time when I crafted her, it was because she was like so much better than everything else on 6 mana. And I think that was like one of the main reasons that they put her in the Hall of Fame, was because for the that mana cost, there was like nothing else ever saw any play, pretty much. I mean, Mind Control costs 10 mana, and obviously that's targeted, but Sylvanas' Death Rattle isn't that much worse than the Mind Control. Like a 5 mana 5/5 is sort of decent stats for an effect, and paying an extra mana for a Death Rattle to the power of that is kind of insane, really. Speaking of which, Sylvanas used to be a 5 mana 5/5.
Now, wrap your heads around that.
Who thought that was a good idea? I was playing Libram Paladin, And a guy devolved my Lanessa into Sylvanas, and then I took his ancestral spirited scrapyard Colossus, and he lost.
Oh no!
I was just creasing, honestly. It was so funny.
That's great. That's fantastic. You once said something to me that really sort of put this in perspective about how valuable Sylvanas is as an effect, or mind control is as an effect in Arena and stuff like that. And it's not just killing your opponent's minion, but you're also summoning a minion, at the same cost.
Yeah.
And that has got to be one of the highest premium costs you could have in Hearthstone, to the point where there aren't really many cards that allow you to switch control of cards.
Since Sylvanas, there's not been really ever a card that's been printed that takes control of an enemy minion.
The other interesting thing about Sylvanas is it really makes both players have to think about how they're going to trade. If you're the Sylvanas player, you have to make sure that the opponent can't just trade all of their minions away, and then you just don't take control of anything.
Yeah.
Now, that is a half-decent situation in of itself, by the way. As the player who is playing against the Sylvanas, you have to make sure that the opponent's chances of taking control of something valuable are minuscule. Again, we're talking about what the classic set does. It's evergreen cards that's supposed to teach people how to play the game, right? And Sylvanas encourages you to really think about trading a turn in advance or 2 turns in advance, and you have to play around it a little bit.
I'll tell you something else interesting about the card is that it's possibly the best counter to Ragnaros in the game.
I was just thinking the exact same thing. I thought it's like the Ragnaros counter.
Yeah, it's always kind of been a bit of a joke about hopefully they don't play Sylvanas into my Rag, because then it becomes one of the an awful game state, essentially.
Let's talk about some decks that have run Sylvanas. So we've got Control Warrior. If there is a slow card that has a lot of value, Control Warrior has probably tried it at some point, and it was pretty bloody good in that deck, especially against other control decks. Steal their Ragnaros, steal Tyrion.
Yeah.
Pretty bloody good. Handlock, frequently used her. You've also got all the variants of Control Paladin that you could ever think of. Mid-range Druid, Control Priest sometimes. Ramp Druid is just another good thing to ramp to. Reno decks, especially in Gadgets On, so Reno Lock and Reno Mage and those sort of things. I've also written down literally every standard deck with N'Zoth in it. Lots of control decks run Sylvanas as just a good card to play on 6. Half decent against mid-range decks. Really, really strong against other control decks most of the time, especially if you knew when to play the card, and in a control matchup, you often had a lot of freedom as to when you would play the card. The card saw a bit less play as the game sped up, though. I think that's fair to say.
Well, in the year that I played Standard, when it was in Standard, I didn't see it as much as I was expecting to, I guess, would be how I would put it.
The format had sped up. Aggro was on the rise. This is in Shaman Stone as well, in the middle of 2016, when Spirit Claws was everywhere.
Karazhan, what fun, eh?
Yeah, very fun. Obviously, Sylvanas isn't great at that point. The opponent has no reason to trade into her. You'll struggle to actually get value off of the Sylvanas Death Rattle, because a lot of aggro decks don't run minions that have more than 5 attack.
Yeah.
What you want is taunts and stuff that impacts the board. And it feels strange to say this about Sylvanas and it doesn't impact the board because it's a really good card. But that is the problem with it.
It doesn't impact the board, though. You're right. It doesn't do anything the turn it's played. That's
yeah,
exactly right.
I'll tell you what, post Spirit Claws nerf, I say post aggro nerfs in Gadgets On. So Small Time Buccaneer got nerfed, Spirit Claws got nerfed. After those cards got nerfed, I was able to find many more lists that ran Sylvanas.
I seem to remember Reno Mage being big at that point.
Yeah.
It's an indicator of how the meta was.
Is there anything else we can say about Sylvanas in Standard? I'm not sure.
I don't think so. I'm not sure how much there is to say about it in Wild either. I've barely seen the card, honestly.
Yeah, it's funny that. Sylvanas in Wild, you see it in Death Rattle Hunter. It has seen play in Egg Hunter, which is a sort of aggressive variant of this deck, or classic Dane Death Rattle Hunter, which is Corpse Widows and Deathstalker Rexar and maybe Sneed's Old Shredder as well. In both of these decks, you basically try and proc the Death Rattle as many times as you can. So Play Dead, Feign Death, both of them very efficient decks, and Sylvanas is great in that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the Dane's deck's very efficient. Egg Hunter's more of an anti-control deck, but it can hold its own.
Big Rogue, as we've already mentioned, runs Sylvanas quite frequently, especially when there are lots of big decks around like Big Priest and now Big Shaman. But that's a case where they can cheat them out and abuse the death rattles.
Yeah.
Now it is all about, right, can we proc the death rattle? How many times can we proc the death rattle? Are we in a meta where it's worth doing so? Those are the questions that deck builders have to ask. It's not a case of like, right, Sylvanas is a good card, let's put it in. Even in N'Zoth decks, you want to play Kartuk Defender now.
I think it might have its time to shine at some point, but not for now. Natalie Seline, 8 mana, 8/1 priest, legendary minion. Battle Cry, destroy a minion and gain its health.
Cool card.
I think it's a cool card. I think I'm going to cover this one because it's. I'm not sure James is an expert.
I'm afraid I've never seen anyone put it in a deck, but I also don't play Standard, so.
So Seline's an interesting card. It's not common in Standard, I would say. I don't think it's stable, but it's a tech card in Highlander Priest, which is a fairly decent deck, and it can hold its own on ladder. Like it turns up in the data Reaver reports. Seline isn't always in that deck, but it's a tech card, and you sometimes just run it. If you want an extra late game thing to just like do a decent job of killing stuff, it'll do a decent job of killing stuff, right? You quite often generate a copy of Seline, and it's pretty much always decent, and it's like it'll always have a target that you can get a reasonable value on.
That's fair.
And it's 8 attack, so it always contests well. The other thing to mention about the card is it's extremely common off of Zephrys.
Yeah, it's an 8-drop that contests Tyrion, as something that you pick off of Zeph. And that's quite impressive.
It's interesting, just in like it's good for the game, is that really?
I went on about class identity in episode 3 like a madman, but I think it really does fit with what they want it to do. They want Priest to be a control class. They kind of like the idea of it sort of buffing minions occasionally, and I think this does a really good job. It reminds me a lot of one of the previous Priest legendary minions. It's one of the trolls. You'll know what I'm talking about, the one that swaps health.
Bolger.
Yeah, it reminds me quite a lot of him.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. And that's a really cool card as well. That was an absolute Priest staple for a long time, Bolger. It doesn't see so much play now in WoW because of 50 card syndrome, but it's like... It's still a decent card, right?
Natalie is a really interesting card. I feel like it does exactly what the classic set does, or should do, in that it provides powerful cards that aren't completely broken and just enable people to tinker with different things. And as you say, it's a good tech card. It's just a solid card that you can put in a deck, and it's never absolutely broken. I think it's really good design.
Yeah, I like the design.
I was going to mention the thing in Wild, but I don't think there's a point.
Natalie's obviously very new. It's only been out for an expansion cycle, so it's a decent card. That's all there is to say about it, really.
Yeah, I think it's got time to prove itself. It's just another interesting tool in Priest's toolbox. Leeroy Jenkins, 5 mana, 6/2. Charge, Battle Cry, summon 2 1/1 whelps for your opponent, and by the way, whelps are dragons. Not that matters in the slightest. Do you know what? Just before we get into how broken and stupid this card is, one of my favourite things to do is search all Reddit threads on competitive Hearthstone, and you search for Leeroy Jenkins, you get loads of threads from when this card was nerfed to 5 mana, of people saying, this card's not going to be very good anymore. People don't understand how much of a change 1 mana is. And I'm just sat here in 2020 thinking, right.
That logic actually follows for a lot of cards. 1 mana is often a difference between a card being broken and seeing no play.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But in the case of Leeroy, well,
it's more a case of it just shows how completely off the mark they were with putting us at 4.
And 4 mana is absolutely crazy that anyone thought that was fair. What they said when they did this created one of the biggest memes in the history of the game. So I've got it here. Leeroy Jenkins created a strategy that revolved around trying to defeat your opponent in 1 turn without requiring any cards on the board. We like having a variety of deck types, but taking 20 plus damage in 1 turn is not very fun or interactive. Now, anytime any sort of combo deck, anything burst, anything comes up, fun or interactive, that's kind of the rhetoric from everybody.
The natural comparison to make with Leeroy is Mage's spell Fireball, in that they're both very, very similar cards with very similar roles. Now, I don't think anyone would be incorrect in saying that Fireball is actually a better card than Leeroy, right?
Yeah.
It's a class card, right?
Yeah.
You can play Fireball anytime, not just as a finisher, and not have the downside of summoning any whelps. Costs 1 mana less, goes through taunts. It can be discounted with, I don't know, Sorcerer's Apprentice, all this sort of stuff. But Leeroy is neutral, which means that in classes which don't naturally have lots of burst, they find a lot of uses for Leeroy. So I'm thinking Pirate Warrior, 6 damage just straight from hand, can just be enough to close the game out, and often is.
The thing to say about Leeroy is that Mage is one of the only classes it doesn't see playing. Classes that can play cards that do similar things to Leeroy, but better, often don't play it, but everything else does. The reason Leeroy is so significant is that it's the amount of damage that he does. Blizzard have often gone on the record about how much they don't like charge or burst damage. And if you compare Leeroy to any other like charge card or burst card, especially like classic or neutral cards, you have things like Wolf Rider, which deals 3, Nightblade, which is 5 mana, deals 3, Reckless Rocketeer, 6 mana, deals 5. Leeroy is 5 mana to deal 6, and 6 is a lot for 5 mana, and it's like, it's just the break point that it's like just enough where it's worth playing, yeah, right? Like 6 damage is a significant amount to the point where it's just worth playing it above like a Wolf Rider or some such.
If you're playing Wolf Rider and you're playing something else alongside it, you've got to really consider whether that minion is actually going to be able to attack and convert its stats into damage on the opponent's face, or your opponent's going to be able to remove it, or something like that. Whereas Leeroy, it's all going in the face, right?
Yeah. It's that honestly, mate, that's poor from you. That is
professional, that
poor
way.
From you. Family friendly, PG clean podcast here. So we don't expect such stuff like that.
Oh dear. But anyway,
well,
you've got to consider when you're playing an aggro deck, you're always trying to do this calculation of, right, if I play this minion without charge now, what are the chances that its attack will be converted into damage, right? Because there is always the chance that it doesn't. Whereas you have something like a hero power or a spell, which always has the immediacy, it's always going to convert into damage. But the trade-off, obviously, is that minions can trade multiple times. Now, like Jamie says, Leeroy is just at that break point where on turn 5, instead of playing Wolf Rider and a 2-drop, just play Leeroy. It always closes out your curve. It's fantastic.
In aggro decks, and especially in burn, like heavy burn decks, like Face Hunter, sort of aggro shaman decks that care about every single bit of damage you do, the Leeroy being 6 attack for 5 makes a massive difference because of how damage efficient it is for its mana.
Yeah, even after the nerf.
Should we discuss some of the decks that it was used in?
Let's talk about some. Do you want to start?
So, perhaps the most fun and interactive use, and the reason that got him nerfed, really, I think it was Miracle Rogue. Because Rogue has Shadow Step, and Leeroy in Shadow Step's quite good. So, like, pre-nerf, you could do Leeroy Shadow Step, double Cold Blood, which is 10 mana to deal 26 without a cost reduction. Miracle Rogue was extremely efficient at drawing through its deck, so it was quite consistently able to do that.
The other thing that you've got to remember about Shadow Step and Cold Blood, as we said in the Van Cleef episode, is that these are cards that Miracle Rogue played anyway. These are just good cards in that deck. While we're saying this is some big combo finisher, a really good Miracle Rogue player would know which matchups they wanted to save the Shadow Steps for that big burst combo, and which ones they just do for, I don't know, a bigger Van Cleef or another swing off of SI7 agent or something like that.
Yes, that's a good point. And in a lot of cases, you could do chip over the course of the game, and you could just finish them off without any real setup. That Leeroy Shadow Step combination saw play up until it got Hall of Famed a few months ago. In fact, it was probably the most common win condition of Galakron Rogue. I played a lot of that deck towards the end, and the amount of games I won by going Leeroy Shadow Step, Leeroy, and then like Eviscerate, like a good chunk of games. That's been relevant anytime a sort of aggressive rogue with the run Shadow Step's been around.
Yeah, Shadow Step or Waggle Pick or anything like that.
It's especially unpleasant when Cold Blood used to cost 1 mana. Rogue's the most notorious use of Leeroy. It was Rogue's kill combo in like any sort of aggressive or combo-y rogue deck. Reno Lock used to play one of 2 finishers, which were Jiraxxus, which we discussed, or the Leeroy Power Overwhelming combo. It's 3-card combo, Leeroy Power Overwhelming, Faceless Manipulator to do 20. And it required 1 tick on 1 piece from Emperor Thaurissan, which is quite easy to do, obviously. That was a common win condition for Reno Warlock. Another one, should I say, is Shaman with Flametongue Token and Wind Fury, which wasn't as common, admittedly, but it was more common when it was 4 mana, I think. That was a lot of damage as well. Another recent combo use of it was Quest Hunter with Unseal the Vault. You could go Leeroy Unleash the Hounds, and then Hero Power. Practically, it was a similar situation to the Rogue, where Quest Hunter does a lot of chip, and it's like quite good at building boards multiple times, and you could quite often just finish them off.
That's an interesting one. But these are all the like really fancy uses of it, and although these were obviously very powerful, very frequently you just run Leeroy as 5 mana deal 6, and that was enough.
This is the power of the card, because it's just kind of, you can be 5 mana deal 6 in an aggro deck without no support.
Yep.
But it also gives you access to all this reach and all these insane high ceiling burst combos in classes that kind of need the burst combos to, to win the game.
Well, exactly. I mean, how many charge cards does Rogue have? Oh, sorry, 0, right?
Exactly.
I just want to say a few things about Leeroy and Wild, in that it's quite different to what we've said about Rag and Sylvanas, in that they've sort of come and gone and maybe will strike again. But for now, they really don't see much play. In that Leeroy, ever since coming to Wild, has seen play and has never stopped seeing play.
What makes the card so powerful is that there's nothing else that does anything like it, really. Certainly not neutral, and it's hard to replace it directly. It's not like it's been power crept by a Wild card, because Blizzard don't really print charge cards.
You'd think at this point we'd have a better thing, and pretty much is still like as good as he's ever been. It's just bizarre. If there is an odd deck, it usually runs Leeroy, except strangely for Odd Demon Hunter. But again, that's a deck with cards that do very similar things to Leeroy, especially pre-nerf Metamorphosis.
Yeah.
You
never know. People might play Leeroy now that Metamorphosis is down to 4/4. I've got another episode of the Hearthstone Gamepedia segment.
Here we go. Come on.
Leeroy can be buffed from hand to increase the power of his strike, or possibly even giving him a chance to survive next turn. Don Honcho alone can buff Leeroy into an 11/7 minion with charge, devastating anyone without removal or taunt. For Paladins, combined with 2 Blessed Champion for 32 damage 2-turn kill. I mean, no. I have nothing to say other than that's a 15 mana combo that they've got there. So even if you reduce the cards, it doesn't work.
Oh, that's great. Oh my god, I'm surprised they've not mentioned Emerus as like a way to buff it.
Well, no, I'm getting to Emerus, okay? No, you're jumping the gun there.
You're joking.
Another combination would be to buff Leeroy using Emerus and making a copy of the 12/4 Leeroy using a Faceless Manipulator for 24 damage, which in most cases should be able to finish the opponent. The drawback of this combo is that Emerus is a 10 mana card, and if played on an empty board, the opponent could prepare for a finisher by either placing a taunt or playing a secret that nullifies the attack. The brain on these people, honestly, it's amazing.
Oh my goodness gracious me. That's gold.
Honestly, that is galaxy brain stuff, that is. And then there's another one that it says if your opponent has an unlicensed apothecary in play, you can play Leeroy to deal 10 damage to them with the Wells. This is implying that your opponent's willingly played unlicensed apothecary.
Anyone could enter that wiki, right? You could be editing it. Like, I'm just taking your word for
That's
it.
That's too much effort for me. I'm not willing to put that.
No, I trust you. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. The next time you listen to this, we're going to be talking about Nox Realness. That's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Cheers. Should we do closing thoughts on Rags? I can sort of edit this whole mess of a section together.